Marcus Thompson adjusted his worn baseball cap as he climbed the narrow stairs to apartment 12F, his 6-year-old daughter Emma's small hand clasped firmly in his. The old building creaked under their weight, and the fluorescent lights in the hallway flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper. This wasn't the life he had imagined when he was younger, but it was their life now, and he was determined to make it work. The apartment building housed dozens of families, most of whom kept to themselves. Marcus preferred it that way. He had learned that drawing attention usually meant trouble, and trouble was something he couldn't afford with Emma depending on him. Every morning he would wake at 5:30, prepare breakfast for his daughter, get her ready for school, and then rush to his job at the local hardware store where he worked as an assistant manager. The pay wasn't much, but it covered their basic needs and allowed him to pick Emma up from school each afternoon. Emma was the brightest part of his world. Her mother had left when she was just 2 years old, unable to handle the responsibilities of parenthood. Marcus had been devastated at first, but he quickly realized that Emma needed him to be strong. She had her mother's bright blue eyes and Marcus's stubborn determination. Despite their modest circumstances, she was always cheerful, curious about everything around her, and had an infectious laugh that could brighten even his darkest days. Their daily routine was simple, but consistent. After school, Emma would sit at their small kitchen table doing homework while Marcus prepared dinner. They would eat together, sharing stories about their day. Emma would tell him about her friends at school, her favorite subjects, and the book she was reading. Marcus would listen intently, asking questions and encouraging her dreams. In the evenings, they would read together on their second-hand couch, Emma curled up against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. The other residents of the building barely acknowledged them. Mrs. Chen from 12G would nod politely when they passed in the hallway. The young couple in 12E kept their music too loud and their arguments even louder. The elderly man in 12D seemed friendly enough but kept to himself. Marcus didn't mind the anonymity. It meant fewer complications, fewer questions about his past, and fewer people who might judge him for being a single father struggling to make ends meet. What the neighbors didn't know was that Marcus carried invisible wounds that ran deeper than his financial struggles. He had served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan as a Marine Corps sergeant. The memories of those years haunted his dreams and sometimes invaded his waking hours without warning. He had seen things that no person should have to see. Lost friends who were closer than brothers and carried the weight of decisions made in impossible situations. The transition back to civilian life had been harder than he had expected, especially after Emma's mother left. Marcus had been awarded several commendations during his service, including a Bronze Star for valor during a particularly dangerous mission where he had saved the lives of 4 fellow Marines. But he kept his medals locked away in a small box in his bedroom closet, along with his uniform and other reminders of his military service. He didn't talk about his time in the service, not even with Emma. She knew her daddy had been a soldier, but she was too young to understand the complexities of war and its lasting effects on those who served. The hardware store where Marcus worked was owned by an elderly man named Frank Peterson, a Vietnam veteran who had recognized something familiar in Marcus when he first applied for the job. Frank never asked direct questions about Marcus's military service, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. Frank had given Marcus a chance when other employers had passed him over, and Marcus was grateful for the steady work and the respect Frank showed him. Despite his efforts to blend into the background, Marcus couldn't completely hide who he was. His posture remained military straight, his responses were crisp and efficient, and he had an awareness of his surroundings that came from years of training. He automatically scanned rooms when he entered them, positioned himself where he could see exits, and moved with a precision that spoke of discipline and purpose. These habits were so ingrained that he wasn't even conscious of them anymore. Emma noticed these things about her father, even if she couldn't fully understand them. She saw how he always made sure she walked on the inside of the sidewalk, how he checked the locks twice before bedtime, and how his eyes seemed to see everything around them when they were out in public. She felt safe with him, safer than she had ever felt with anyone else, and she sensed that her father was someone special, even if the rest of the world didn't seem to notice. The apartment building was located near a military base, which meant that occasionally aircraft would fly overhead. Whenever this happened, Marcus would instinctively look up, his trained eye automatically identifying the type of aircraft and its likely mission. Emma would notice how her father's entire demeanor would change in these moments, becoming more alert and focused, as if some part of him was still connected to that world he had left behind. Their life in apartment 12F was quiet and unremarkable from the outside, but it was built on love, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter. Marcus was content to remain invisible, to live their simple life without drawing attention to themselves. He believed that the best way to protect Emma was to stay under the radar, to avoid complications and to focus on giving her the stable, loving home she deserved. He had no idea that circumstances would soon conspire to change everything, bringing his carefully constructed world of anonymity crashing down in ways he never could have imagined. The first sign that something was different came on a Tuesday morning in late September. Emma had developed a slight fever during the night, and Marcus decided to keep her home from school. As he called in sick to work, explaining that he needed to care for his daughter, he noticed unusual activity outside their building. Military vehicles were parked along the street, and personnel in dress uniforms were setting up what appeared to be some kind of ceremony preparation. Marcus peered through their small living room window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. His military training kicked in automatically as he observed the scene below. These weren't regular soldiers going about routine business. The precision of their movements, the quality of their uniforms, and the obvious importance of whatever was happening suggested this was a high-level operation. A black sedan with government plates sat prominently among the military vehicles, its windows tinted dark enough to conceal whoever was inside. Emma, despite her fever, was fascinated by all the activity. She pressed her face against the window next to her father, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the uniformed personnel moving with purpose below. Marcus gently pulled her back, not wanting to draw attention to their apartment, but he couldn't help continuing to observe from a more discreet position. His instincts told him that something significant was about to happen, and those same instincts that had kept him alive in combat zones were now on high alert. Around 10 in the morning, Marcus heard footsteps in the hallway outside their apartment, followed by a gentle but authoritative knock on their door. His blood pressure spiked immediately. In his experience, unexpected visits from official-looking people rarely brought good news. He instructed Emma to stay in her bedroom and approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, he could see two men in military dress uniforms, their posture and bearing indicating they were career officers of considerable rank. When Marcus opened the door, he immediately recognized the insignia of a full colonel and a major. Both men looked surprised when they saw him, as if they hadn't expected to encounter someone who clearly recognized their ranks and understood military protocol. The colonel, a distinguished man in his 50s with graying hair and piercing eyes, stepped forward first. His name tag read Harrison, and his chest displayed ribbons indicating extensive combat experience. Colonel Harrison explained that they were conducting a security sweep of the building in preparation for a visit from a high-ranking military official. Standard procedure required them to briefly interview all residents to ensure there were no security concerns. Marcus nodded his understanding and invited them in, though every instinct told him to be cautious. As they entered his modest living room, both officers' eyes swept the space with the same trained awareness that Marcus himself possessed. The major, younger than his companion, and clearly more junior in experience, began asking routine questions about Marcus's employment, how long he had lived in the building, and whether he had noticed any unusual activity in the neighborhood. Marcus answered truthfully, but kept his responses brief and professional. He was determined to get through this interview without revealing anything about his military background, hoping they would simply check him off their list and move on to the next apartment. However, Colonel Harrison seemed to be studying Marcus more intently than the situation appeared to warrant. Something about Marcus's posture, his manner of speaking, and the way he carried himself had caught the colonel's attention. When the major finished his questions, Harrison stepped closer, his experienced eyes noting details that most people would miss. He observed how Marcus stood at attention without realizing it, how his eyes automatically tracked their movements, and how he maintained the kind of situational awareness that only came from military training. The colonel asked Marcus directly if he had any military experience. For a moment Marcus considered lying, but something about Harrison's demeanor suggested that deception would be pointless. The man clearly knew what to look for and had probably already drawn his conclusions. Marcus admitted that he had served in the Marines but emphasized that his service had ended several years ago and that he was now just a civilian trying to raise his daughter and make an honest living. Colonel Harrison asked for more details, and Marcus found himself reluctantly sharing basic information about his service record. He mentioned his tours in Afghanistan but tried to downplay their significance. However, when he mentioned his unit and the time frame of his deployments, both officers exchanged glances that Marcus didn't miss. Something he had said had clearly resonated with them, though he couldn't imagine what it might be. The major excused himself to make a phone call, stepping out into the hallway and speaking in hushed tones into his radio. Marcus could hear fragments of the conversation, enough to know that they were discussing him specifically and that someone higher up the chain of command was being consulted. His anxiety level increased significantly. This was exactly the kind of attention he had been trying to avoid, and now it seemed like his past was catching up with him in ways he had never anticipated. When the major returned, Colonel Harrison's demeanor had shifted noticeably. He looked at Marcus with what appeared to be a mixture of respect and curiosity. He asked if Marcus would be available later that day for a follow-up conversation, explaining that the visiting official might want to speak with him personally. Marcus felt trapped. Refusing would likely create more suspicion, but agreeing meant potentially exposing himself and Emma to complications he wasn't prepared to handle. Emma chose that moment to emerge from her bedroom, still in her pajamas and clearly feeling unwell. She walked straight to Marcus and wrapped her arms around his waist, looking up at the two officers with the innocent curiosity of a child. Colonel Harrison's expression softened as he looked at her, and Marcus could see the man calculating the implications of what he was seeing. A single father, clearly struggling financially, trying to raise his daughter while keeping his military service hidden from the world. The officers prepared to leave, but Colonel Harrison handed Marcus a business card and asked him to call if he remembered anything else that might be relevant to their security assessment. As they walked toward the door, Harrison paused and looked back at Marcus one more time. There was something in his expression that suggested this conversation was far from over, and that Marcus's carefully maintained anonymity was about to become much more complicated than he had ever imagined. Marcus spent the rest of the morning pacing around his small apartment, his mind racing with possibilities and concerns. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, her fever finally breaking, but he couldn't relax. The visit from the military officers had stirred up memories and anxieties he had worked hard to suppress. He kept glancing at Colonel Harrison's business card, wondering if he should call and try to explain his situation, or if that would only make things worse. Around 2 p.m, Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end identified himself as General William Rodriguez, and he asked if Marcus could spare a few minutes for a conversation. Marcus nearly dropped the phone. In his military career, he had never spoken directly with anyone above the rank of colonel, and the idea of a general calling his personal phone number seemed surreal. General Rodriguez explained that he was the visiting official the security team had mentioned, and that he would very much like to meet with Marcus in person. The general's tone was respectful and courteous, not at all what Marcus had expected from someone of such high rank. Rodriguez explained that he had reviewed Marcus's service record and was impressed by what he had read. He mentioned specific details about Marcus's deployments that made it clear he had access to classified information and had done his homework thoroughly. More importantly, he seemed to understand the challenges that veterans like Marcus faced when transitioning back to civilian life. Marcus agreed to meet with the general, though his hands were shaking as he hung up the phone. He arranged for Mrs. Chen from down the hall to watch Emma for a couple of hours, grateful that the elderly woman had always been kind to his daughter. As he prepared to leave, Marcus found himself automatically reaching for his best shirt and pants, his military training reminding him of the importance of presenting himself properly when meeting with a superior officer, even if he was no longer in service. The meeting was scheduled to take place in a conference room at the local military base, just a short drive from Marcus's apartment building. As he walked through the base gates, Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. The familiar sights, sounds, and smells of military life brought back a flood of memories, both good and painful. The young Marines at the gate saluted him respectfully after checking his identification, though he wasn't sure why they would show such deference to a civilian visitor. General Rodriguez was waiting for him in a small conference room, and Marcus was surprised by the man's appearance. Rather than the intimidating figure he had expected, the general was relatively young for his rank, perhaps in his early 50s, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He stood when Marcus entered and extended his hand in greeting, treating Marcus as an equal rather than a subordinate, which immediately put Marcus somewhat at ease. The general began by thanking Marcus for his service and specifically mentioning the incident that had earned him the Bronze Star. Marcus was shocked to learn that Rodriguez knew the details of that day, including the names of the Marines Marcus had saved and their current status. One had gone on to become a successful businessman, another was now a police officer, a third had become a teacher, and the fourth was serving as a staff sergeant at a base in California. All four men had successful lives and families, something that might not have been possible without Marcus's actions on that terrible day in Afghanistan. Rodriguez explained that he had been following the stories of veterans like Marcus, men and women who had served with distinction but struggled to find their place in civilian life. He had seen too many good soldiers fall through the cracks, unable to translate their military skills and experience into successful civilian careers. The general had made it his personal mission to identify these veterans and find ways to help them, not through charity, but through opportunities that recognize their true worth and potential. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with General Rodriguez asking detailed questions about Marcus's current situation, his challenges as a single father, and his goals for the future. Marcus found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, sharing his fears about providing for Emma, his struggles with the invisible wounds of war, and his determination to give his daughter opportunities he had never had. The general listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights that showed he truly understood the veteran experience. Near the end of their meeting, General Rodriguez made an offer that left Marcus stunned. A new program was being launched to place qualified veterans in positions with defense contractors, positions that would utilize their military experience while providing excellent salaries and benefits. Marcus would be perfect for a supervisory role with a company that provided support services to military installations. The salary would be nearly 3 times what he was making at the hardware store, and the benefits package included full health insurance and educational assistance that could secure Emma's future. Marcus was overwhelmed by the offer, but he was also suspicious. In his experience, offers that seemed too good to be true usually were, and he couldn't understand why a general would take such a personal interest in his situation. Rodriguez seemed to sense his hesitation and explained that this wasn't charity or a handout. The position was real, the need was genuine, and Marcus's qualifications made him an ideal candidate. The general had already contacted the company, and they were eager to interview Marcus for the position. The general also mentioned something that made Marcus's heart skip a beat. The company was looking for someone to establish a new regional office, and they were flexible about location. If Marcus was interested, he could potentially set up the office in his current city, meaning Emma wouldn't have to change schools or leave her friends. The stability that Marcus had tried so hard to provide for his daughter could continue, but with significantly improved financial security. As their meeting concluded, General Rodriguez handed Marcus a folder containing information about the position and the company. He also gave him the contact information for the hiring manager and suggested that Marcus call within the next few days to schedule an interview. The general stood and shook Marcus's hand again, telling him that the country needed good men like him in positions where they could make a real difference, and that his service and sacrifice should be rewarded with opportunities, not struggles. Marcus drove home from the base in a daze, the folder from General Rodriguez sitting on the passenger seat, like a potential passport to a completely different life. His mind was spinning with possibilities and doubts in equal measure. The offer seemed almost too good to be true, and years of struggling had taught him to be suspicious of sudden windfalls. Yet something about General Rodriguez's manner and the detailed knowledge he had displayed about Marcus's service record suggested this was legitimate. When he returned to apartment 12F, Emma was feeling much better and was full of questions about where he had been. Marcus found it difficult to explain the situation in terms a 6-year-old could understand, so he simply told her that he had been meeting with some people about a possible new job. Emma's eyes lit up with excitement, and she asked if a new job meant they could get a bigger apartment, maybe one with a balcony where she could have plants like her friend Sarah at school. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table and carefully read through all the materials General Rodriguez had given him. The position was with Mitchell Defense Solutions, a company that provided logistics and support services to military installations across the country. They were expanding their operations and needed experienced veterans to manage regional offices and coordinate with base commanders and military personnel. The job description was impressive and seemed tailor-made for someone with Marcus's background and experience. The salary was indeed nearly 3 times what he was making at the hardware store, and the benefits package was better than anything he had seen in the civilian sector. Health insurance, dental coverage, retirement contributions, educational assistance for dependents, and even a company car were all included. For the first time since leaving the military, Marcus began to imagine a future where he wasn't constantly worried about money. The next morning, Marcus called in sick to work again, though this time it wasn't because Emma was ill. He needed time to process what was happening and to make some important phone calls. His first call was to the hiring manager at Mitchell Defense Solutions, a woman named Sarah Peterson, who seemed to know all about him before he even identified himself. She was enthusiastic about his potential candidacy and wanted to schedule an interview as soon as possible. Marcus's second call was more difficult. He phoned his old squad leader, Gunnery Sergeant Mike Torres, who had remained in the Marines and was now stationed at Quantico. Torres was one of the few people from his military days with whom Marcus had maintained any contact, and he trusted the man's judgment implicitly. Marcus explained the situation and asked for Torres's honest opinion about whether this opportunity was legitimate or if there might be some catch he wasn't seeing. Torres laughed when he heard General Rodriguez's name and told Marcus he was incredibly lucky. Rodriguez was known throughout the Marine Corps as someone who genuinely cared about his people and went out of his way to help veterans transition successfully to civilian life. Torres had heard of several similar situations where the general had intervened to help struggling veterans find meaningful employment that utilized their skills and experience. He urged Marcus not to overthink the opportunity and to pursue it aggressively. The interview with Mitchell Defense Solutions was scheduled for the following Monday, which gave Marcus the weekend to prepare. He borrowed a proper suit from Frank at the hardware store, who was both disappointed to potentially lose a good employee and excited to see Marcus get a chance at something better. Frank had suspected for months that Marcus was overqualified for his position at the store, and he encouraged Marcus to pursue any opportunity that would allow him to use his real skills and experience. Emma sensed that something important was happening, and she became more clingy than usual over the weekend. Marcus spent extra time with her, reading stories and answering her questions about what might change if he got a new job. He tried to reassure her that no matter what happened, they would always be together, and that any changes would be for the better. He could see that she was both excited and worried about the possibility of their lives changing significantly. On Monday morning, Marcus drove to the Mitchell Defense Solutions regional headquarters in a neighboring city, wearing Frank's borrowed suit and carrying a folder with copies of his military records and civilian work history. The building was modern and professional, with a lobby that featured displays honoring military service and photographs of the company's work, supporting various military installations and operations around the world. Sarah Peterson turned out to be a friendly, professional woman in her 40s who had spent 20 years in the Air Force before joining the private sector. She immediately put Marcus at ease by sharing her own stories about the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life. The interview lasted nearly 3 hours and covered everything from Marcus's military experience to his current family situation and his long-term career goals. What impressed Marcus most about the interview was that Peterson seemed genuinely interested in him as a person, not just as a potential employee. She asked thoughtful questions about Emma and how a new job might affect his ability to be present as a father. When Marcus mentioned his concerns about travel requirements or long hours that might interfere with his parenting responsibilities, Peterson assured him that the company understood the importance of work-life balance and was committed to supporting employees with families, the position they were offering would indeed allow Marcus to establish a regional office in his current city, working primarily with the nearby military base and several smaller installations within a reasonable driving distance. There would be some travel required, but nothing that would keep him away from Emma for more than a day or two at a time. The flexibility and understanding that Peterson demonstrated convinced Marcus that this company truly valued its employees and understood the unique challenges faced by veterans. By the end of the interview, Marcus felt more confident and optimistic about his future than he had in years. Peterson told him that she was very impressed with his qualifications and his interview performance, and that she would be in touch within a few days with their decision. As Marcus drove home, he found himself actually beginning to believe that his luck might finally be changing for the better. The call came on Wednesday afternoon while Marcus was helping a customer at the hardware store. Frank answered the phone and gestured for Marcus to take it, recognizing the importance of the moment. Sarah Peterson's voice was warm and professional, as she delivered the news that would change Marcus's life forever. Mitchell Defense Solutions wanted to offer him the position, with a start date 3 weeks away to allow him time to transition from his current job and make necessary arrangements. Marcus had to step outside the store to continue the conversation, his hands shaking as Peterson outlined the specifics of the offer. The salary was even higher than initially discussed, and they were providing a substantial signing bonus to help with his transition expenses. They would also provide a company vehicle and cover the costs of setting up a home office until a permanent regional facility could be established. Most importantly, they were willing to structure his schedule around Emma's school hours and activities, recognizing that his role as a father was his top priority. When Marcus picked Emma up from school that afternoon, he was practically glowing with excitement. He waited until they were home and settled at their kitchen table before sharing the news with his daughter. Emma listened with wide eyes as he explained that they would be able to move to a bigger apartment, that she could have her own room with space for all her books and toys, and that they wouldn't have to worry about money anymore the way they had been. Emma's reaction was everything Marcus had hoped for and more. She threw her arms around his neck and told him she was proud of him, words that nearly brought tears to his eyes. Then she asked the question that had been worrying her most. Would she have to change schools and leave her friends? Marcus was able to reassure her that they would stay in the same neighborhood, at least for now, and that all the important things in her life would remain the same, just better. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity and preparation. Marcus gave Frank at the hardware store as much notice as possible, and his boss was gracious about helping him transition his responsibilities to another employee. Frank even threw a small going-away party for Marcus, inviting the regular customers who had come to know and respect him during his time at the store. It was a bittersweet moment, leaving the first stable job he had found after his military service, but everyone was genuinely happy to see him moving on to something better. Marcus and Emma spent their weekends looking at apartments in better neighborhoods, and they eventually found a perfect 2-bedroom place just 15 minutes from Emma's school. The apartment had large windows that let in plenty of natural light, a modern kitchen where they could cook together, and even a small balcony where Emma could have the plants she had dreamed about. The rent was higher than their current place, but well within Marcus's new budget, and the building was newer and safer than their old apartment building. On his last day at the hardware store, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. General Rodriguez appeared just before closing time, dressed in civilian clothes but still carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. He had come to congratulate Marcus personally, and to let him know that he had been following his progress with great interest. The general explained that Marcus was part of a larger initiative to ensure that qualified veterans received opportunities that matched their skills and potential, rather than being overlooked by employers who didn't understand the value of military experience. Rodriguez also shared something that surprised Marcus greatly. The 4 Marines whose lives Marcus had saved in Afghanistan had all contributed to a fund that was being used to support veterans like Marcus, who were struggling in civilian life. They had never forgotten what he had done for them, and when they learned about his situation, they had insisted on being part of the solution. The general's intervention hadn't been charity or coincidence. It had been a deliberate effort by grateful men to help the person who had given them the chance to have families and futures of their own. Marcus was deeply moved by this. revelation and struggled to find words to express his gratitude. General Rodriguez told him that no thanks were necessary, that what was happening was simply the military family taking care of its own the way it should. He also mentioned that Marcus's new position would likely lead to other opportunities for advancement and leadership, possibly including the chance to help other veterans find similar paths to success. The moving day arrived on a bright Saturday morning in early November. Marcus had hired professional movers, something he never could have afforded before, and the entire process went smoothly and efficiently. Emma was beside herself with excitement as she explored their new apartment, claiming her new bedroom and immediately beginning to plan how she would decorate it. The apartment felt enormous compared to their old place, and Marcus found himself walking from room to room, still hardly believing that this was really their new home. That evening, as they sat together on their new couch eating pizza and looking out at the city lights from their living room window, Emma asked Marcus if he thought her mother would be proud of them now. It was a question that caught him off guard, as Emma rarely mentioned her mother anymore. Marcus thought carefully before answering, telling Emma that anyone would be proud of the wonderful, smart, kind person she was becoming, and that what mattered most was that they were proud of each other and the life they were building together. Marcus started his new job the following Monday, reporting to a temporary office space that Mitchell Defense Solutions had arranged while they worked on establishing a permanent regional facility. His first task was to meet with the commanding officers at the nearby military base and assess their current support service needs. As he walked through the base gates in his new business suit, carrying a briefcase and official credentials, Marcus felt a sense of pride and purpose that he hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The base commander, Colonel Janet Williams, welcomed Marcus warmly and seemed genuinely pleased to be working with someone who understood military culture and requirements from personal experience. Their initial meeting lasted several hours, and Marcus found himself energized by the complexity and importance of the work he would be doing. For the first time in years, he felt like he was using his real skills and experience, making decisions that would have meaningful impact on military operations and the lives of service members. 6 months into his new position, Marcus had established himself as an invaluable asset to both Mitchell Defense Solutions and the military installations he served. His regional office was now fully operational, housed in a modern facility near the base, and he had hired 3 additional staff members, all veterans whom he had personally recruited and mentored. The success of his operation had caught the attention of senior executives at Mitchell Defense Solutions, and there was already talk of expanding his responsibilities to include oversight of multiple regions. Emma had flourished in their new circumstances as well. Her grades had improved significantly, and she had joined the school's chess club and drama program. The financial stress that had once dominated their household was gone, replaced by a sense of security and optimism about the future. Marcus had been able to start a college savings account for Emma, and he had also begun seeing a counselor to help him process some of the lingering effects of his military service, something he had never been able to afford before. The transformation in their lives had not gone unnoticed by others. Mrs. Chen, their former neighbor from apartment 12F, had visited their new apartment and marveled at how much their circumstances had changed. She told Marcus that she had always suspected he was someone special, that there was something about the way he carried himself and cared for Emma that suggested he had an important story to tell. She was delighted to see that the world had finally recognized his worth. In early spring, Marcus received an invitation that would mark the culmination of his remarkable journey. General Rodriguez contacted him to extend an invitation to a special ceremony at the Pentagon, where Marcus would be recognized as part of a group of veterans who had successfully transitioned to leadership roles in the defense industry. The ceremony would be attended by senior military officials, defense contractors, and government leaders, and Marcus would have the opportunity to speak about his experience and the importance of supporting veterans in their civilian careers. Marcus was nervous about the invitation, as public speaking had never been his strength, but he recognized the importance of the opportunity. If his story could help other veterans avoid the struggles he had endured, then he felt obligated to share it. He spent weeks preparing his remarks, with Emma helping him practice and offering suggestions about how to make his speech more engaging and personal. The day of the ceremony arrived in late May, and Marcus flew to Washington, D.C., his first airplane trip since leaving the military. Emma had wanted to come with him, but Marcus felt it was important for her to stay in school, and he promised to tell her everything about the experience when he returned. At the Pentagon, Marcus was reunited with General Rodriguez, who introduced him to other veterans who had similar stories of struggle and eventual success. During the ceremony, Marcus was surprised to discover that several high-ranking military officials knew about his story and his current work. A 3-star general mentioned Marcus's Bronze Star citation during his introduction, and there was genuine applause from the audience when his military service and current civilian achievements were highlighted. For the first time since leaving the military, Marcus felt truly proud of both his service and his civilian accomplishments. When it came time for Marcus to speak, he stood at the podium and looked out at an audience that included some of the most senior military and government officials in the country. He spoke from his heart about the challenges veterans face when transitioning to civilian life, the importance of employers who understand the value of military experience, and the difference that meaningful work can make in a veteran's life. He also spoke about Emma, and how the opportunity to provide for her properly had given him renewed purpose and motivation. His speech was well received, and afterward, several people approached Marcus to discuss his ideas and experiences in more detail. A senior executive from a major defense contractor offered him a position that would involve traveling around the country to establish similar veteran employment programs, a role that would allow him to directly help other veterans while continuing to advance his own career. Marcus was intrigued by the offer, but explained that any decisions would have to take into account his responsibilities as a single father. The executive smiled and told Marcus that they had already considered that aspect of his situation. The position would be based in his current city, with travel scheduled around Emma's school calendar and family commitments. They would also provide resources to help him establish similar programs in other regions, essentially allowing him to build a national network of veteran support initiatives while maintaining his primary role as Emma's father. On the flight home, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him from apartment 12F to the Pentagon podium in less than a year. He thought about the power of simple actions and unexpected connections, how General Rodriguez's decision to personally investigate his situation had changed not only Marcus's life but potentially the lives of many other veterans who would benefit from the programs they were now developing together. When Marcus arrived home that evening, Emma was waiting for him with a handmade banner that read, "Welcome home, Dad." She had prepared a special dinner with help from their neighbor, and had even set the table with candles she had bought with her allowance money. As they sat together eating and talking about his trip, Marcus realized that this moment represented everything he had been fighting for during those difficult years in apartment 12F. Emma listened intently as Marcus described the ceremony, the important people he had met, and the new opportunities that were opening up for their future. When he mentioned the possibility of helping other veterans find good jobs and stable lives, Emma's eyes lit up with pride. She told him that she had always known he was special, even when they didn't have much money, because he had always taken such good care of her and made her feel safe and loved. A few weeks later, Marcus received a phone call that brought his story full circle. One of the 4 Marines whose lives he had saved in Afghanistan, now a successful businessman named David Chen, wanted to meet with him in person. Chen explained that he had been following Marcus's progress through General Rodriguez and wanted to personally thank him for the sacrifice that had made his own life possible. He also wanted to discuss a business proposition that would allow Marcus to expand his veteran assistance programs on an even larger scale. The meeting took place at a restaurant near Marcus's office, and Marcus was struck by how much Chen had changed since their days in Afghanistan. The young Marine he remembered had grown into a confident, successful man with a family of his own. Chen showed Marcus pictures of his wife and 2 children, explaining that none of it would have been possible without Marcus's actions on that terrible day when their convoy had been attacked. Chen's business proposition was ambitious and exciting. He wanted to partner with Marcus to create a national foundation dedicated to helping veterans transition successfully to civilian careers. Chen would provide the initial funding and business expertise, while Marcus would oversee the program development and implementation. The foundation would work with companies across the country to identify opportunities for veterans and provide the support and training necessary to help them succeed. Marcus was honored by the proposal, but he also felt overwhelmed by the scope of what Chen was suggesting. When he expressed his concerns about his qualifications to run such a large operation, Chen reminded him that leadership wasn't about having all the answers, but about caring enough to find solutions and inspiring others to work toward a common goal. Those were qualities that Marcus had demonstrated repeatedly, both in military service and in his civilian career. After several weeks of discussions and planning, Marcus agreed to partner with Chen in establishing the foundation. They decided to call it the Forward March Foundation, symbolizing the idea of veterans moving forward into successful civilian lives rather than being left behind or forgotten. Marcus would continue his current work with Mitchell Defense Solutions while gradually taking on increased responsibilities with the foundation. The announcement of the Forward March Foundation attracted significant attention from both military and civilian media. Marcus found himself being interviewed by journalists and appearing on television programs to discuss veteran employment issues and the importance of recognizing the skills and experience that former service members bring to civilian workplaces. While he had never sought public attention, he recognized the platform as an opportunity to advocate for veterans who were still struggling to find their place in civilian society. Emma was fascinated by her father's growing public profile and often watched his television interviews with great pride. She had started telling her friends at school about her father's important work, and her teacher had even invited Marcus to speak to Emma's class about military service and helping others. Emma's confidence and pride in her father's accomplishments reflected the security and stability that had replaced the uncertainty of their earlier years.